Please stand clear of the doors. Por favor, manténganse alejado de las puertas.
Congratulations, you made it to the finale of 50 for 50, the top 50 attractions in the history of Walt Disney World. I'm your host, Bryan Perri, and thanks so much for tuning in. Before we get to the top two, we had to make it through 48 amazing attractions just to get to this point. So, what do you say we condense it and give you a quick recap over the next minute of rides 50 through 3.
This is Tower. Launch sequence engaged. We have ignition.
Careening through the cosmos for just under 50 years, Space Mountain has held the mantle as one of, if not the most famous roller coaster in the entire world, spawning alternate space offshoots in Anaheim, Tokyo, Hong Kong, and Paris. The original Space Mountain opened in January of 1975 down in Orlando and Walt Disney World, thus beating Disneyland to the punch for once. Though that wasn't the original plan. Despite taking in guests for the first time over 8 years after Walt Disney's death, Space Mountain was thought up by Walt himself after taking in the rousing success of the Matterhorn in 1959. Created in conjunction with aerodynamics, not only was the Matterhorn the world's first steel roller coaster, its combination with top-tier theming re-established what a coaster could be. With plans for a renovation of Disneyland's Tomorrowland in 1967, Walt and designer John Hench decided to double down on this newfound roller coaster phenomenon and come up with a coaster titled Spaceport, or Space Voyage. The new ride would provide Tomorrowland with the e-ticket attraction it so desperately needed, as less than 10 years into its existence, the area was already feeling a bit dated. The initial concepts for the thrill ride would consist of not 2, but 4 separate tracks that would weave in and out of the building, similar to how the Matterhorn coaster weaved in and out of its mountain. The exterior of the building changed throughout the planning process, and eventually Walt decided that a space-themed roller coaster that traveled outside of a building would ruin any sort of space illusion, and so the coaster was redesigned again. Another aspect the coaster called for was a completely automated computer system, a first of its kind. The technology was still a few years away from being possible in the mid-60s, and with space, pun intended, becoming an issue in the now already renovated Tomorrowland, Space Voyage was shelved for a few years, and the focus shifted to simply opening the Magic Kingdom by 1971. Once Disney World did open in 1971, plans for a roller coaster and the park's first thrill ride gained traction. A Matterhorn duplicate and accompanying village were considered, but once again, space was an issue, as Magic Kingdom's Fantasyland didn't exactly have much room, and the Matterhorn couldn't really go anywhere else. And so, back in slid the idea of Space Voyage, now dubbed Space Mountain. A few more arguments about what the building should look like took place. Check out this dome Space Mountain, but ultimately the bizarre building we know today won out. After 2.5 years of construction, Space Mountain opened at Walt Disney World in 1975, complete with that world's first computer automated coaster system. The finished product would end up featuring only 2 tracks rather than 4, and a proud sponsor, an RCA, would fund $10 million for the attraction. They would also get to design part of the ride's exit. As for the ride itself, guests zoom through space while projections of stars and comets fly by them on their journey of unexpected dips and drops. With the benefit of taking place in the dark, the coaster's mundane speed of barely 35 miles per hour feels otherworldly, and the ride's length and time is more than twice as long as Rock and Roller Coaster. Fans can debate whether they believe Magic Kingdom's version of the coaster is superior to Disneyland's, which opened 2 years later in 1977. Each feature their own unique elements, though Disneyland's ended up being cloned for both Hong Kong and Tokyo. As for Disneyland Paris's version of the ride, it's regarded as one of the company's most unique coasters and follows its own story. But it was Magic Kingdom's that paved the way for not only Space Mountains worldwide, but the computer-operated coasters we know today. Now approaching its 50th anniversary in just a few years, the ride continues to top lists and polls as the favorite attraction at Walt Disney World. Not bad for an old chap. The lore of Space Mountain continues to grow as the decades continue to pass, and the ride stands as one of the greatest roller coasters ever built.
We have counted down 49 of the greatest attractions in Walt Disney World history, and here we are, the big finale, number 1, Primeval World at Disney's Animal Kingdom. You're not
Hollywood, 1939. Amid the glitz and the glitter of a bustling young movie town at the height of its golden age, the Hollywood Tower Hotel was a star in its own right, a beacon for the show business elite. Now, something is about to happen that will change all that.
Orlando, 1994. Amid the glitz and glimmer of a bustling young theme park, Disney's MGM Studios decided to make an expansion that would change the landscape of Walt Disney World forever. We were introduced to the Hollywood Tower Hotel, an attraction completely unique like nothing else seen before. The theming, forget about it. The coolest thing in the world. And that's why, even today in 2021, it stands the test of time and reaches the top of our list, our number 1 attraction in the history of Walt Disney World.
Looming over Hollywood studios like a watchful guardian, the Tower of Terror that stands at 199 feet has been dropping guests off at the end of Sunset Boulevard for the last 27 years. Providing Walt Disney World with an unfathomable attraction back in 1994, one could guess that the ride's system and storytelling was created in modern day, as the attraction was created far ahead of its time. The story of the Hollywood Tower Hotel is somewhat unique, and while thinking of the park without the ride seems foreign, that's exactly what existed for the park's first 5 years of existence. When MGM Studios called for their Sunset Boulevard expansion soon after opening, Disney had to make a decision on what ride to create in order to lure people into the then half-day park. Dozens of ideas were thrown around Imagineering, including creating a thrill attraction based on not one of the scariest films of all time, but one of the funniest, Young Frankenstein. At the time, Disney and then CEO Michael Eisner were determined to build a working relationship with comedic genius Mel Brooks, where Eisner knew that Mel was a big fan of Disneyland, and incorporating the filmmaker into a ride would aid in the hopes that Brooks would start making films out of Disney's Floridian film location. Don't forget, MGM Studios didn't only perform as a theme park, but Disney was pushing it as their main film studio outside of California. While the Young Frankenstein ride didn't gain much traction other than a few renderings here and there, the next idea conceptualized by Brooks and Imagineering sure did. For a haunted hotel would mark the location for the park's newest thrill ride. guests would venture into the structure with a story that focused on Brooks creating a movie inside the haunted building. The idea of an elevator traveling horizontally and even utilizing a drop shaft ride system seen at places like Six Flags Great Adventure were born here. Eventually, Brooks moved on from the idea of constructing a theme park attraction, and Disney looked elsewhere for a storyline to accompany its haunted hotel idea. They landed on the Twilight Zone. A hit television show that ran from 1959 to 1964 and gained traction in syndication throughout the 80s. The Twilight Zone provided the recipe for success for many anthology and mystery programs that came after it, for each episode differentiated from the next in characters, stories, and settings. The eerie and unnerving nature of the show remained with each iteration, as did its host Rod Serling, who provided introductions, narration, and conclusions to every program. After studying every single episode and acquiring the rights to the series, Disney elected to create their own story, as one based on a haunted elevator didn't exist. And so, the Tower of Terror of today was born. Dating back to its earliest concepts, the ride called for guests to enter a lobby of this haunted hotel and eventually enter a pre-show room where a television would convey the backstory of why the hotel was haunted. In order to create a story based on the Twilight Zone, one needed its iconic host, Rod Serling. Now, unfortunately, Rod had passed away in 1975, but Disney knew that utilizing a different host on screen would immediately take guests out of the fifth dimension and Twilight Zone story. For there was no Twilight Zone without Rod Serling, and after scouring episodes, Imagineers ended up using a clip of Rod from the beginning of the It's a Good Life episode. In the clip, Rod talks about a map on display behind him. Imagineers ended up replacing the background from the episode with the haunted elevator, in which guests would soon board. Before he says the word map, the camera would cut, and voiceover artist Mark Silverman, who Rod Serling's widow Carol Serling helped select, would continue a dubbing talking about the ride's story. Here's a full side-by-side.
Tonight's story on the Twilight Zone is somewhat unique and calls for a different kind of introduction. This, as you may recognize, is a maintenance service elevator.
This, as you may recognize, is a map of the United States.
This, as you may recognize, is a maintenance service elevator, still in operation, waiting for you.
For in 1994, it was truly a breathtaking element of the attraction that showcased to what length Imagineering was willing to go to establish a story properly. As for the ride itself, the old drop tower ride system was altered, and elements from the great movie ride, like the computer-automated vehicles, were installed for the scene in which the elevators travel through the fifth dimension and move horizontally. For the ride's thrilling conclusion, vehicles enter an elevator shaft and drop an appropriate 13 stories. When designing this portion of the ride, WDI consulted with the Otis Elevator Company, the company who normally attempts to create elevators that don't freefall, and ended up creating a system in which cables would actually pull the elevator down at a force faster than gravity, making the ride far more intense than the normal freefall attractions mentioned before. And so in July of 1994, the Hollywood Tower Hotel, the ghost of Rod Serling, the spirit of Mel Brooks, and the ultimate culmination of what makes Walt Disney Imagineering so special, opened its doors. Since then, it has set the standard of what a theme park ride strives for it provides a benchmark for the world-class attractions that have been built since its opening nearly 30 years ago. A 10 in theming, a 10 in storytelling, a 10 in innovation, a 10 in thrills, and a 10 in appearance add up to a perfect 50, properly dropping it into the #1 spot on our list of the 50 greatest attractions in Walt Disney World history.
De las cuentas.